Welcome to my garden, GinGeeGoodEarth production, Roman numeral 6, part 11C, a combination of part 11A and B, and we're going to begin a reading, A Universal History of the United States of America. Here we have a red cardinal. Just some housekeeping to review. Any red cardinal thumbnail on my GinGeeGoodEarth videos is the indication of a reading on the book called The Vikings. So if you check the thumbnails on my videos, and at the present time I have almost 50 YouTube videos, and if you see a red cardinal thumbnail, that will indicate I will be doing a partial reading on the Vikings, and there's a total of 8 parts. The thumbnail for this video is a new thumbnail, and it's a close-up shot of one of my pansies in the garden. But previously, the thumbnails were of the Plymouth European adventurers or colonists. And then the other thumbnail had to deal with the new girl in town, where she's holding up a bowl over her head. She's a glass figurine, and that has to do with my GinGeeGoodEarth production introductions to my books Honey for All, White Buffalo Spirit, and Pittsburgh, Victoria, and All That Is Gilded, directed by myself, Gretchen Schmitt, the Pittsburgh, Victorian, Gibson girl and gentleman theatrical productions. Now, without further delay, we're going to read a inspired kind quote. And then I want to go over conundrums. And then I have a recipe for whiskey to remind us of the Whiskey Rebellion during the Revolutionary War in America. After that war, Europe decided that United States of America should pay for the Revolutionary War. So they tried to tax our homegrown whiskey that was going to be shipped overseas. And then that's why we had a rebellion, and it was called the Whiskey Rebellion. And this is Frontier whiskey, and I have a recipe right here. So let me just hop to the recipe. I'll put the bottle down. And this is a Bullet Bourbon Frontier whiskey made in Kentucky, and you don't need a lot to enjoy it, and it's a pretty big bottle. I won this at a basket raffle, so I probably would not have purchased anything like this, but I cook with my distilled spirits, and I like a hearty red Merlot glass of wine with our dinner meals. So let's read the recipe out of the Stouffer's Restaurant Guide booklet. And this is for a whiskey punch, but I'm scaling it down for a beverage for 2. So I'm going to read the original ad to the punch recipe in case you have a party and you need to serve 50 people 2 drinks per person. And then I'll scale it down to 2 people. Add to punch bowl 4 quarts straight bourbon whiskey, 4 quarts grapefruit juice, 1 quart pineapple juice, 1 quart lemon juice, sweetened to taste with simple syrup, which is just sugar water. So you can boil water and add sugar to it and then let that cool and it becomes a syrup, because as the water evaporates after you boil, it condenses it to a syrupy liquid. Stir to blend ingredients. Cut up the fruit in punch bowl. Fresh pineapple rings. Orange sliced or segments. You can even add grapefruit slices. Punch bowl should have a large pieces of cracked ice in it because you definitely want to serve it cold. Now, if we want to condense this recipe for a whiskey punch drink for two, you basically add two glugs or 1 shot of bourbon bullet whiskey. Then in a blender, you want to put this in. And then a 1/2 cup of grapefruit juice, a 1/2 cup of pineapple juice, 1/4 cup of lemon juice. Sweetened to taste, even if you just want to use sugar, but I think it doesn't even need added sugar. Stir and blend the ingredients, and then each cup have crushed ice and a slice of fresh pineapple, oranges, and grapefruit. Then add that to your glass and then put in the blended ingredients, and that should be a delicious, refreshing afternoon summer beverage. Enjoy! Next, I'm going to read a quote on a great thought of the day. And the person who wrote this was Jimmy Dean. I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to always reach my destination. A conundrum. Why can't a fisherman be generous? The answer is because his business makes him selfish. What animal took the most luggage into the ark, and which took the least? The elephant, who took his trunk, while the fox and the rooster had only a brush and a comb between them. The final one, what is it that belongs to you entirely, and yet is used more by your friends than by yourself? Think a moment. The answer is your name. Now, I would like to go ahead and start reading, and this is going to be a repeat. But what happened was I lost memory in my memory card, and I had to delete old videos and save and so forth, which took a tremendous amount of time. And I never had the video to find out where I left off. So I'm just going to repeat. So we're on page 79, A Universal History of the United States of America. In the year 1675 began the famous Indian War, which was termed King Philip's War. The leading one was Philip, Sachem of the tribe living within the boundary of Plymouth, Rhode Island. His brother, being suspected of plotting against the whites, was seized by a detachment of soldiers. Philip ever sought to revenge the treatment of his brother. His succeeding in forming a confederacy able to send into action between 3,000 and 4,000 warriors. The immediate cause of the war was the execution of 3 Indians by the English, whom Philip had excited to murder one Sussaman, an Indian missionary. Sussaman, being friendly to the English, had informed them that Philip, with several tribes, were plotting their destruction. The execution of these Indians roused the anger of Philip, who immediately armed his men and commenced hostilities. Their first attack was made June 24th upon the people of Swansea in Plymouth Colony, as they were returning home from the public workshop on a day of humiliation and prayer. That's very interesting because I never looked at a place of public worship is a day of humiliation and prayer. And I guess you're, making penance for the wrongs that you have done that day. And so that's why they call it a day of humiliation and prayer. Under the apprehension of the approaching war, 8 or 9 persons were killed. Another way of humiliation, a day of humiliation, is going to confession. And then prayer. Under the apprehension of approaching war, 8 or 9 persons were killed. The country was immediately alarmed, and the troops of the colony flew to the defense of Swansea. On the 28th, the company of horse and company of foot, with 110 volunteers from Boston, joined the Plymouth forces at Swansea. The next morning, an attack was made upon some of Philip's men, who were pursued, and 5 or 6 of them killed. This resolute conduct of the English made a deep impression on the enemy. Philip, with his forces, left Mount Hope the same night, marking his route, however, with the burning of homes and the scalping of the defenseless inhabitants. And as I mentioned before, scalping was a European war tactic. So that was, brought into America. It being known that the Narragansets favored the cause of Philip, he having sent his women and children to them for protection, the Massachusetts forces under Captain Hutchinson proceeded forthwith into their country, a renewed entreaty with them, or to give them battle. Fortunately, a treaty was concluded, and the troops returned. On the 17th of July, news arrived that Philip with his warriors was in a swamp at Pocasset, now Teverton. The Massachusetts and Plymouth forces immediately marched to that place, and the next day resolutely charged the enemy in their recesses. As the troops entered the swamps, the Indians continued to retire. The English in vain pursued till the approach of night, when the commander ordered a retreat. Many of the English were killed, and the enemy seemed to take courage. It being impossible to encounter the Indians with advantage in the swamps, it was determined to starve them out. But Philip, apprehending their design, contrived to escape with his forces. He now fled to Nipmucks, a tribe in Worcester County, Massachusetts. Worcester County, Massachusetts, whom he induced to assist him. This tribe had already commenced hostilities against the English, but in the hope of reclaiming them, the governor and council sent Captains Wheeler and Hutchinson to treat with them. But the Indians, having intimidation of their coming, lurked in ambush for them, fired upon them as they approached, killed 8 men, and mortally wounded 8 more, of whom Captain Hutchinson was one. The remainder of the English fled to Quabong, Brooklyn, Brookfield. The Indians, however, closely pursued them into the town and burnt every house excepting one in which the inhabitants had taken refuge. This house at length was bullied and surrounded. For 2 days they continued to pour a storm of musket balls upon it, and although countless numbers pierced through the walls, but 1 person was killed. With long poles they next thrust against its brands, and rags dipped in brimstone They shot arrows of fire. They loaded a cart with flax and tow, and with long poles fastened together, they pushed it against the house. Destruction seemed inevitable. The house was kindling, and the savages stood ready to destroy the first that should open the door to escape. At this awful moment, a torrent of rain descended and suddenly extinguished the kindling flames. August 4th, Major Willard came to the relief, raised the siege, and destroyed a considerable number of the assailants. During the month of September, Hadley, Deerfield, and Northfield on Connecticut River were attacked. Several of the inhabitants were killed and many buildings consumed. On the 18th, Captain Lathrop and several teams and 80 young men, the flower of the county of Essex, were sent to Deerfield to transport a quantity of grain to Hadley. On their return, stopping to gather grapes at Muddy Brook, they were suddenly attacked by near 800 Indians. Resistance was in vain, and 70 of these young men fell before the merciless enemy and were buried in one grave. Captain Moseley, who was at Deerfield, hearing the report of the guns, hastened to the spot, and with a few men attacked the Indians, killed 96 and wounded 40, losing himself but 2 men. Early in October, the Springfield Indians, who had hitherto been friendly to the English, concerted a plan with the hostile tribes to burn that town, having under cover of night received 200 or 300 of Philip's men into their fort. With the assistance of these, they set fire to the town. The plot, however, was discovered so seasonably, the troops arrived from Westfield in time to save the town, excepting 32 houses already consumed by fire. Soon after hostilities were commenced by Philip, the Tarentines began their depredations in New Hampshire and the province of Maine. They robbed the boats and plundered the houses of the English. In September, they fell on Saco, Scarborough, and Kittery, killed between 20 and 30 of the inhabitants, and consigned their houses, barns, and mills to flames. Elated with these successes, they next advanced toward Piscataqua, committing the same outrages at Oyster River, Salmon Falls, Dover, and Exeter. Before winter, 60 of the English in that quarter were killed, and nearly as many buildings consumed. The Indians in those parts, however, had real ground of complaint. Some seamen, hearing it, reported that Indian children could swim by instinct, overset the canoe of Squando Sacum of the Saco Indians, in which were his squaw and his infant child. This act Squando could not overlook,